So we see a duality. We see a dichotomy that exists in us. It's a certain polarity as well. And that polarity means that we have the ego and we have the personality. And on a higher level, which means on the more, well, on the invisible level, which doesn't manifest itself directly, we have what we call the higher self, and we also have the monad. So you see four elements, the ego, the personality, the higher self, and the monad. So how are these related, and how do they manifest themselves in our daily life? And what Jose wrote yesterday is, I think, very clear to be able to say that the ego has no understanding of eternity, has no aspiration for eternity, and it acts as a protective mantle. I've introduced the word mantle, as a mantle of protection around the personality, which means that the personality, basically, for most people, is enclosed, is closed off by the ego. So it's not surprising that in psychology, in philosophy, one talks also of the ego as linked to an egocentric way of living. So if it is egocentric, it means it's turned towards itself, towards its own self-identification. And therefore, it creates an environment in which we all live, an environment of the self and for the self, protecting the personality as an expression of itself. Are we happy with that, that aspect of the two, of the personality and the ego, and then linked to what we were talking about of the higher self and the monad? Jose or anybody else, if you'd like to respond on that, and then we can build on those building blocks, if you like, of our understanding, which is essential and necessary.
Would you say that then the two less refined, if that's the right word, would be the ego and the personality, which makes the lower self, and the monad and, sorry, I've forgotten, the higher self would actually be what we typically call the higher self, which is a more purified, purified, that's a good word, aspect of the personality.
Fine. So we're linking then the personality and the ego with the invisible aspects, which we call the higher self and the monad. But as they are linked, they are not purer. So it doesn't mean that they are more elevated, but because they are in the invisible realm, in the astral etheric, but really the astral realm, they, of course, are the energies and forces that are in control. So if we talk of a lower self, as you just said, Nairi, and the higher self, they are totally interlinked. And because they are interlinked, the control comes from the higher to the lower. And this is something that we, generally speaking, and people are unconscious about. So they will say, I feel this, I do this, I aspire to that. And it's all a mixture of everything and nothing in that respect, okay? So and then we made yesterday the distinction between the ego and the personality. The personality as the mask that we see appearing on our screen, or the persons we meet also being that persona, being that personality, which displays all those different elements, like fingers going through a hand. You see those fingers moving, but you don't see the hand behind it. So what is moving me? What is moving my expression? Well, it could be the personality, it could be the ego, it could be, for example, in fits of anger or in strong dominating situation of extreme fear or self-protection, the question of fight or flight of an animal, so the animal being that is in us. This is then the expression also through those fingers of the higher self, of the oral being, which is there in terms of self-protection. And because people don't distinguish between the ego and the personality, they see this all as one. And now, if I may, if I hope not to complicate the picture, but let's introduce the word soul. So people will either turn to poetry and say, well, the soul of flight, and we'll read beautiful books on that. But what is the soul? And the universal teaching expresses or defines the soul as being fivefold. And what is interesting, it is not related to anything very subtle, but related to our own organic composition and makeup, which means that the soul is who we are, what we are, in terms of our nervous system, expressed by the personality, in terms of our state of consciousness, of what I think, what I am, expressed by the personality, the blood that flows through our veins and gives us the energy, which is pumped then through the heart, which has an effect on our whole metabolism, which has an effect on our state of health or state of sickness. That is part of the soul. And also, we are vertical creatures, so we stand. And as we are standing, where we're sitting at the moment, but if we stand up, we are one of the few animals, vertebrae, that are able to maintain ourselves in a vertical position, thanks to that spinal column. And those spinal column with their 32 vertebrae, which is very interesting if you look at the number, and it has a Gnostic meaning as well, express themselves as energy, so as fire through our system. That is the soul. So the soul is who we are. It's not something elevated. It's not something up in the sky. It is the expression of ourselves. And that we can call then the natural soul, which expresses itself through the personality and expresses itself also through the ego, which is self-maintaining, which wants to control the whole situation. The personality is there being used by the ego, but it doesn't really know where it is. And that's another step in our discussion. Are we happy with that? We've built blocks. We've talked about the lower self, the higher self, the ego, the personality, the monad, and the oral being, or the higher self. And we've introduced the subject of the soul as being the, in Latin, soul is anima. Anima meaning what animates, in English, what gives life. So it is these energies which flow through each and every one of our cells, the billions of cells that compose and create man, generically speaking, woman, as we are. This is the soul. So the soul is as we are, with its ups and downs, with its egocentric, with its other more humanitarian, possibly, aspects. Okay, so I've introduced the word soul.